The European Parliament backs using EU funds for the first time to produce weapons and ammunition for Ukraine.
US President Joe Biden ends his tour to Europe with a volley of hard-hitting remarks about Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Southern Europe braces for another heat wave as reach well into the 40s in some places. In a historic move, the U.S. has approved its first over-the-counter birth control pill, expanding access to millions.
More money for more weapons. On Thursday, the European Parliament adopted what's known as Regulation ASAP, which earmarks €500 million from the EU's budget to finance its industrial production capacity for ammunition like ground-to-ground missiles and artillery. The bill proposed by the European Commission in May was fast-tracked through the EU legislative process, and almost all the political groups backed it in the final vote. Their main reason being to support Ukraine against the Russian invasion.
We should not refrain from defensive capabilities support like the one that we are giving with these regulations, so that we can have Ukraine not be without the ammunition they need to defend themselves from the aggression.
And then there's a specific inserted paragraph about making sure that these extra resources with the increases of ammunition production are meant for Ukraine, and then secondly to then also supply our own storages that have been depleted by supporting Ukraine.
It's the first time that the European Union directly finances weapons production. But not every MEP is happy about it, with opposition coming mainly from the left.
So this means that we now have a situation in which the European Union funds not just research and development for arms, does not just buy arms, but is also going to fund directly the production of weapons from companies that are making excessive profits already. I mean, the war in Ukraine for weapons companies has been a blessing, you know, so they're making excess profits, and we're gonna basically subsidize their production. It's a big mistake. This money should go somewhere else, into public services. Hospitals, schools throughout Europe need that money.
The money for Europe's military industry will come from 2 EU defence funds. But national governments can also top up their money by using their pandemic recovery and resilience plans. Final adoption of the regulation by member states is expected before the summer break.
La guerra de Ucrania ha sido un baño de realidad para Occidente, para los planificadores militares, también civiles, relacionados con la defensa, porque es el regreso de la guerra convencional de alta intensidad, y eso nos ha sacado de 20 o más bien 30 años de falsas nociones, o de nociones que no se ajustan a la realidad actual. Y nos está llevando a unas decisiones de calado histórico.
Since last February, international donors have pledged more than 80 billion euros in military aid to Ukraine. But according to experts, some of those weapons, including Leopard tanks and Bradley infantry vehicles, have had a bad start, as weaknesses in old weaponry, such as wheeled tanks, have rendered them obsolete. But those failures could also be down to how the weaponry is being used.
If you had well-trained NATO troops driving French tanks, you would see fewer losses in those tanks in Ukraine, not because the NATO troops are technically more capable with each tank, but because they know how to operate the tanks in conjunction with other systems like artillery systems and infantry. Their communications are better.
The extensive use of drones has been a notable feature of the war in Ukraine, but some argue that communications and electronic warfare could play an even more important role and could help Ukraine win the war.
You see that innovation now. I think it will be even better. Right now, it has to be quick. It has to be improvisation. And what you'll see in a future stabilized conflict is a lot of long-term innovation. And on the Russian side, it's going to take the Russian military 10 or more years to rebuild what they've lost in this war. And what the Russians are taking away is that their systems aren't very good.
Joe Biden has ended his tour to Europe with a volley of hard-hitting remarks about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and President Vladimir Putin. Speaking after meeting Nordic allies on security issues and following an earlier NATO summit, the US president said Putin had already lost the war in Ukraine.
Putin has a real problem. How does he move from here? What does he do? And so the idea that there's going to be what vehicle is used, he could end the war tomorrow. He could just say, I'm out. But what agreement is ultimately reached depends upon Putin and what he decides to do. But there is no possibility of him winning the war in Ukraine. He's already lost that war.
Asked about the recent Wagner mutiny against Moscow's military leadership led by Yevgeny Prigozhin, Biden suggested the mercenary chief might be poisoned.
God only knows what he's likely to do. I'm not even sure, we're not even sure where he is and what relationship he has. If I were he, I'd be careful what I ate. I'd be keeping my eye on my menu. But all kidding aside, who knows?
Biden's trip is being seen as a relative success for the Allies, with Sweden now on the verge of membership and Ukraine receiving strong commitments of future support from its Western backers.
The EU will lift restrictions on imports from Japan imposed following the Fukushima nuclear accident in 2011. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen made the announcement on Thursday after a meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in Brussels. She says it was an evidence-based decision.
We have taken this decision based on science and based on the proof of evidence and based on the assessment of the International Atomic Energy Agency. And we also agreed to solve several other trade issues in the course of this year, in particular the access for our agricultural products to the Japanese market.
The measures imposed over 12 years ago now stopped farm and fish imports from Fukushima after the nuclear plant meltdown contaminated the region. There was also a strong emphasis on economic security at the EU-Japan summit. Leaders expressed their concerns at China's recently announced restrictions aimed at restricting the supply of gallium and germanium. The two materials are used in computer chips, solar panels and other crucial products. Some experts say it won't have the impact China wants, but that isn't stopping Brussels and Tokyo from increasing their cooperation to counter Beijing's influence.
Prime Minister Kishida, you have the floor.
国際秩序の維持強化に向けて引き続き緊密に連携していくことについて本日の協議で改めて確認することができました。特に現下の厳しい安全保障環境の下、EU がインド太平洋への関与を強めていることを歓迎いたします。
Both sides agreed to work together to find alternate sources of critical raw materials used in what are considered crucial products. Beijing has a near monopoly in this field, and the EU and Japan say this over-reliance must end. Christopher Pitchers, Euronews, Brussels.
As Southern Europe braces for another wave of soaring temperatures, it's not just people that are struggling to cope with the heat. In Madrid Zoo and others across the region, staff are working in various ways to help their animals keep cool. For some, it's frozen treats. For others, a gentle hosing.
Ten en cuenta que ellos tienen sus sombras, sus piscinas, sus duchas. Lo que no hacen es forzarse. En eso puede que sea mucho más interesante. No tienes que estar trabajando, lo que nos dicen siempre, con las olas de calor, a plena sol. Entonces ellos lo hacen de forma natural.
The Mediterranean and southern Balkans will likely see the severest heat from the weather system crossing from North Africa. Forecasters are predicting temperatures well into the 40s in some places. In some urban areas, authorities are implementing heat wave crisis plans, including reducing working hours and issuing phone alerts. It comes as other parts of Europe recover from extreme weather of another kind. Austria was one of several countries lashed by storms that brought high winds and flooding in recent days.
air passengers in Germany suffered lengthy delays on Thursday after climate protesters broke into 2 of the country's major airports. Members of the Last Generation activist group cut through security fences in Hamburg and Dusseldorf before gluing themselves to the runway. Dozens of flights were cancelled and some arrivals were diverted to other airports. The group accuses the German government of failing to tackle the climate crisis. Germany's transport minister condemned the protests as criminal activity.
U.S. drug regulators have approved the country's first birth control pill to be available without a doctor's prescription. Opil, from drug maker Perrigo, will soon be as easy to buy as eye drops. Requiring a prescription to get contraceptive pills is a significant barrier for many in the country.
Which, of course, have a bigger impact on Black people, Indigenous people, Latinx folks, Asian American Pacific Islander folks, other folks of color, young people, folks working to make ends meet. You know, we know that those barriers are part of the systemic barriers faced by many people trying to access healthcare in this country, and we're particularly hopeful that it will transform access for those folks.
Campaigners in the U.S. have been pushing for wider access to the pill for decades. Challenges that lower-income people face include paying for doctor's visits, getting time off work, and childcare.